So I was taking a walk this morning and having some WhatsApp messages with a dear friend of mine. And there's been this kind of theme over the last couple of days. I mean, my work, of course, revolves a lot around relationship. First and foremost, our relationship to ourselves, with ourselves, because that sets the tone for how we relate to other people, and most especially how we are in romantic relationship. And I was watching a podcast about a young couple that had consciously uncoupled. And so this whole, topic of relationship and challenges in relationship and breakup, separating, and really when you boil it down, it's just like, fuck, relationships are deeply vulnerable. This is why we run into challenges. Like it stirs all of our shit up and triggers our wounds, and it's deeply, deeply, deeply vulnerable. And so, I get a lot of people that call me that have been single for a long time, and they're like, why am I single for this long? Or why do I keep attracting the same kind of relationships? Or I'm in a relationship, but these challenges come up, or, this is how I'm feeling in the breakup or post-breakup. And all of it has an element of fear. Right? And it's totally understandable because relationships are deeply vulnerable. So what I want to talk about today is this concept of the phrase that came into my mind is, what if we just let it go? And I'm going to go into what I mean by that. So tune in, or stay tuned, I should say. This is Corinne Bloom, and you're listening to Raw Conversations. So this isn't going to be a linear conversation, but I'm not sure if my podcasts are ever linear, to be honest. So, okay, what do I mean by letting it go? It's kind of ambiguous, right? And yet very specific. It's a total oxymoron. And I think it's something that is easier said than done. It's a practice, and it goes along with what I really try to support in people is to have a daily, continual practice where you connect, relate, converse, just talk with yourself. Really every day, to get to know yourself more, to go into the inner journey of, peeling back the layers of the onion, as cliche as it is, and really coming back home to yourself and discovering who you truly are underneath who you think you should be, and the identity that you've created around your limiting beliefs and your wounding and your traumas, or, whatever, not to catastrophize who we are, but you know what I'm talking about. If you've followed me to this point, you have an understanding of where I'm coming from. So this concept of, can we just let it go, requires that we do the inner work. Like, to be honest, none of this, I think, is possible without some kind of self-awareness, which requires doing the inner work. And simply what that means, for some people that might be, doing coaching or therapy or plant medicine or breath work or sound healing, just something that feels supportive, that creates a safe space where you just get to look at yourself and be with yourself and listen to yourself. And really the point is to get to, the point where the moment where you really love and accept yourself. That's the goal, if there ever was one. So, okay, what do I mean by what if we just let it go? I was thinking about what is the common denominator that arises within relationship, whether we're single or in a couple or we're separating from a romantic partner. Like, what is the thread that gets woven through all of those things? And really what we're looking at is our relationship to relationship, our relationship to love, essentially. And the thing is it's vulnerable, and in vulnerability, there's going to be sensitivity and there's going to be wounding, because as I've shared in a previous podcast, part of being human is we all experience a wounding, but in essence, our wounding can become our greatest gift. It's the arc of life where we get to forget who we are and then remember again who we are. And in that, arc, journey, transition, metamorphosis, we get to discover who we are, and it's just beautiful. It's a really, really beautiful thing. So because we have this wounding, there's going to be fear and there's going to be self-protection because we don't like getting hurt. It's painful, right? And it's scary. And so especially if we've been hurt in some shape or form as a child, because being human, we at some point experience separation or rejection or abandonment or confusion, something that where we feel the disconnect perhaps with the people that we love. And so I would say pretty much every human being probably has had that experience, but if we weren't held in that experience consciously, if there wasn't a container of love in that moment, then we're all going to have an element of love is scary, right? Love can hurt. Broken hearts hurt. But on a side note, I will say that pain doesn't necessarily equate something being bad. Pain is just another sensation. You could see that pain and a broken heart is actually something that doesn't break us, but cracks us open. And really, this is what we want us to be, in this open, expansive, heart-centered space where, when we are in our heart, we are in our most powerful version of ourselves. So, but because there's fear, which is totally natural and normal, we hold on to things. Right? So if we don't have the conscious awareness of our wounding and our triggers and our belief systems and our patterns and our habits and how we show up and how we communicate, all of these things, right? If we haven't done that work and we don't have that map, you could say, to understand ourselves better, relationship becomes a lot of reactivity and attack and defense and coping and all of these things until we make it conscious, right? But at the root of it is this is just really deeply vulnerable. Even if we're very consciously aware of our wounding and our patterns, it's still just deeply vulnerable, as is being human. Like, being human is a very vulnerable experience. And I think we need to redefine all of these words. What is pain? What is vulnerability? What actually really is love and connection, right? Because sometimes love gets tangled up with infatuation. It gets tangled up with attachment, right? Different attachment styles. Like, to really be in a state of love, in the pure essence of love and unconditional love, most especially in partnership and coming out of it, which is conscious uncoupling is all about that, right? How to stay in a state of love or really be held by the container of love as you move through this transition. In order to really go into the purity of what love is, we have to tend to our fear, because our fear can create all sorts of projections. So if there's this root of fear associated with love and relationship because it's deeply vulnerable, we hold on to things. We hold on to grudges. We hold on to resentment. We hold on to anger. We get defensive. We blame. We attack. We, go into our story. And actually what happens in that moment is that we break trust and we break connection because we're in the state of fear. Now, when I say that, I equally understand why we go into that state of fear and why we protect and why we become defensive and why we hold on to anger and resentment, because there's pain underneath that. And the pain comes from being hurt, and the hurt comes because I loved you and I didn't feel safe in that moment. Whatever. It really comes down to just a basic sense of I didn't feel held, or I didn't feel seen, or I didn't feel, supported in that moment. And love wasn't there to catch me. So this idea of what if we just let it go? I don't think that happens in a snap, but it's the question that I'm inviting you to ask is, what are you holding on to? What narrative are you holding on to where maybe, for example, I'll just speak as a woman. What I was looking at myself this morning was, okay, what beliefs do I have about men still? That I might still, even on a really minute level, because I've done a lot of work around this topic. But, growth is continual, right? It's infinite. But I was really checking in with myself. Well, is there any part of me that still feels like I have a kind of, I even like, well, maybe is there any part of me that's still like, I hate my father a little bit, because he wasn't present in my life. And so therefore I learned to, that men were disappointing. And, my prior belief, my former belief was that, men abandon me, or they're unreliable, or they're disappointing. And I've worked through a lot of that. I don't have that same relationship to abandonment anymore. But I was really digging down and looking at previous relationships and coming out of them. And it was like, if there was any bit of resentment, it was like, well, what is the resentment, right? The resentment is hurt and pain, and how maybe in the relationship we felt pained by something, and maybe we didn't feel supported in that pain, or we didn't feel seen in that pain. We didn't feel like it was acknowledged. And so the hurt is what instigates the kind of holding on to either the resentment and the anger. And on a side note, when people go through divorce, especially if it's after years and decades, they can get really nasty and ugly if it's not held in a container of consciousness and love, because all of the old pain comes up. Everything that was swept under the rug, that was brushed over, that was just swallowed, and just all the unspoken pain comes to the surface, and it comes up and out to be healed, but it can come out really sideways because, again, if we didn't process it in the moment, it almost comes out with a vengeance. And I think that's why so many separations, breakups, divorces get really, really ugly, because, and the thing, unfortunately, is like the catalyst for that, or the vehicle for that, is money and possessions. It's like, I'm going to fuck you over by, taking your house or your car or all of your money. Or a friend of mine was saying that they had friends that divorced, and years of litigation with lawyers that cost I can't even tell you how many tens of thousands, like an absurd amount just on the fees for the lawyer. And you think, God, what is that about? That's a lot of pain. That's a lot of unseen pain and anger. Anger is unconscious pain that gets directed, through these kind of weird ways, like, I'm going to take all your money because that is going to make my pain feel better. And actually, at the end of the day, it doesn't. And actually, when we have terrible breakups, even if we feel justified and righteous, it's actually, we're hurting ourselves. So I'm focusing now a little bit on breakups because of also just the theme of kind of what's come up in these days with the conscious uncoupling. But it all ties together. It's all about relationship in general. But yeah, this like, we end up hurting ourselves because nobody deep down likes conflict. We tend to be, I believe that we're innately compassionate beings, and just through our own, oh God, there's so much. It can be indoctrination. It can be led by terrible example, by society. And it can be our own hurt and pain and wounding and heartbreak and disappointment that, depending on how we choose to look at things, do we take them as an opportunity to grow, or do we get hardened by them, and do we shut ourselves down by them? Which, by the way, if you've done that in the past, you can still turn that around, because love is the ultimate alchemist and can melt anything away with enough time and loving attention. So coming back to, the reason why we don't always have peace in our relationships and certainly in our breakups is because we're running with the kind of unspoken, unseen, unrecognized pain. Things aren't conscious. We're not communicating authentically and vulnerably. We're not taking self-responsibility and ownership for our experience. But probably even more importantly, I think a lot of people go into relationship unconsciously, maybe coming from our kind of wounded inner child that's like, love me, validate me, make me feel better, make me feel whole, or whatever our attachment is. Anything that we go into which isn't consciously going into, we're going to play out our unconscious patterns, right? Fears, insecurities, wounds, all of that. So that's, again, I will reiterate why the inner work is so, so vitally important if we want to have healthy relationships. So we hold on to things because of pain and hurt. So how do we let go? How do we let go of pain and hurt? And how do we heal it, really? Part of healing it is we have to let go of the attachment to the story that it's like, you hurt me. You did this to me. That's the victim. And the victim likes a lot of attention. And the victim likes to stay a victim. And it somehow can make us feel righteous and justified. But actually, again, it only creates more pain because we sever our connection with the person or people that we love. But actually, we sever our connection to ourselves because we're not really going into a state of self-love and support. We're just in the victimization, which is very disempowering. So part of the process of healing is letting go of our attachment to whatever story or narrative we have. And we got to look at the beliefs that are underneath it, but really going, okay, what would it take for me to really allow myself to open up to receiving love? This is kind of a really important one because a lot of people go, yeah, well, of course, duh, I want to be loved. Like, I want someone to love me. But actually, people have a lot of sneaky, unconscious coping mechanisms, strategies to keep love away, to keep love at bay. If you have a fear of abandonment or a fear of rejection and it's unconscious, you will attract emotionally unavailable, men or women. And the relationships won't work. And you might go, well, Jesus, this always happens to me. And you go into the victimization. But actually the reason, because there's always a reason for our behavior, the reason is actually love doesn't feel safe. So I'm going to make sure I'm not going to get into a relationship that can actually be a relationship, right? I'll sabotage it, or I'll run away before, or I'll reject it before they reject me. We get caught in these patterns, right? And it sounds really convoluted, but it is a self-protection mechanism. So letting go of our story and our resentment and going, can I really actually allow myself to open up to receiving love and being loved, is such a huge step of letting go of the pain and the resentment and the anger or whatever it is that actually closes our heart and keeps us from connection. And unless, I'm going to say, of course, unless you are in a relationship that really is toxic or abusive and that person isn't treating you well and they're being manipulative or they're lying or they're out of integrity, okay, that's a bit of a different story, right? But when you really know deep down that somebody loves you, those are the moments where, we kind of have to come back to, if I really knew and trusted that this person loves me, why would I want to hold on to my resentment or anger towards them? And the story might go something like, well, they don't really love me, right? That would be coming from a lack of self-worth or not really trusting love. So that points to, what work do we still have to do within ourselves to really trust love? Not even just trust another person, or ourselves, but trust love itself. I think relationship teaches us about our relationship to love. What is our definition of love? What are the connotations that we've, had with love in the past? And how do we need to kind of redefine those and update them in that so that it's in alignment with really loving ourselves and being in our self-worth and being authentic versus the love that is still defined by your wound, which is love isn't trustworthy, it's not dependable, it's disappointing, it hurts, it's painful, it leaves, it's not safe, you can't trust it, whatever it is, right? We have a lot of definitions and connotations with even just the word love and our relationship to love. So that's a thing to get curious about. But if we can go into this place of, okay, I know that this person loves me. And yes, sometimes their actions and their behaviors cause me pain. They cause me suffering. But how does holding on to that anger or resentment serve me? Is it serving me? And how is it keeping me from actually just receiving what we really want deep down, which is love? Why do we push it away? Because we're afraid. Because we don't want to get hurt. And the thing is, if you're in a relationship, this is where conscious communication is so important. And that you create a container where, I talk about the third entity in my coaching practice, which is really the container. It's the relationship itself, which is going to be different in every relationship because it's the entity that is created when two individuals come together, and no two individuals will create the same container. It will be different, right? Because you're two different beings. And so what you create in a relationship will have a different essence, even if we bring in our patterns and all of that stuff. So, if we really create a foundation that is self-aware and we're going, okay, we really want to create the container of this relationship to be based in love and trust and to really communicate consciously and authentically, to take ownership for our experience, to be self-responsible, to do the inner work and to really understand what self-care means, then it's like we can show up in the moment and say, this is what's going on for me. This is what I'm hurting, or I feel scared, or I feel jealous because, or I feel resentful because, and it doesn't have to become an argument because holding it in the container of like, okay, let's look at this together. Let's see, where is this coming from? So not coming from a place of reactivity, which is unconscious behavior, but coming from a place of conscious behavior, which is how are we going to respond to this? And again, I will say it a million times, it's impossible to do this without doing the inner work yourself. Like we can't expect our partner to just hold it all up for us. It really takes two to tango when it comes to this. And that's why conscious uncoupling really requires awareness of each individual, because it really means showing up and being incredibly humble and incredibly authentic with the process and what's going on for you. And really at the core of that is, how are you scared? And when you're scared, how do you take care of yourself? How do you hold yourself? How do you love your fear? How do you love your vulnerability? How do you ultimately love your humanity? So I think we eventually, through all of that, can arrive to that place of like, well, what if we just let it go? Like, what if I just saw it through the clear lens that we get to when we've sifted through all of our limiting beliefs and we've dealt with the wound? And not to say that it's like, I'm done. I've gotten there. I've landed. I've gotten the master's degree, and I'm like the certificate, whatever the hell you want to call it. That like, check, I've done my inner child wounding work. Check, I have no more triggers. Check, like we're human, right? We're not robots. So we always need to tend to ourselves lovingly, because even if we heal the wound, there's still the scar of the wound and there's still memories of the wound. And like I said, relationships, love, are deeply vulnerable. So shit's going to come up. It's how we respond to it and be with it in the moment that is the most important thing. So it's a process, right? You don't just get there and then all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, I can let it go. But what would it be like to even just go into a relationship, or as you're in a relationship, or maybe you're separating and coming out of a relationship, really no matter where you are, single, couple, divorcing, this is your relationship to love. And so what if we consciously asked ourselves, what am I holding on to that is keeping me away from love? And is it worth holding on to? And what would happen if I just let it go? Like, what would happen if I just let go of the story? You know, like if you know anything about Joe Dispenza's work or Bruce Lipton, it's like we have the opportunity to change our relationships, our reality, our health and well-being, our everything, like instantaneously. We actually have the opportunity to do that. We are capable of that. What keeps us from that is our attachment to what we know, and our attachment and our habits with, what we believe and the story that we tell. So the mind works in a funny way. I'll leave a really quick example of this right now. This morning, I had something replaying in my head. It was something that I needed to respond to. And I didn't want to respond to it until after I had done everything, my self-care program of the morning. And yet it was replaying through my mind the whole damn time. And I was like, well, this is really distracting. It's really annoying. Why am I holding on to this thought? And I did get to a point where I just kind of, often when we're in that state and something is annoying us, we'll go, how do I get rid of it? I don't like this. How do I get rid of it? I'm going to stop thinking about it. And I never find that works. Like, what actually makes it subside a little bit is you acknowledge it. So I was sitting there eating my breakfast going, oh, wow, how curious is this that I'm really attached to this like loop of thoughts that are just on repeat. And the moment I did that and I just acknowledged it and I was curious about it, it shifted and I kind of let go of it. So my point is that our mind can really get fixated with things. And so especially if something is habitual and it's deeply ingrained as a pattern and a belief system, we get very attached to it because we identify with it. And the moment we identify with something, like we feel like, well, that's me. It's not who we are. Like the essence of who we are, I've talked about this in the past. The essence of who we are is like the canvas, and our experiences are the paint and the color and the shapes that we paint on it. We can paint over it and we can erase it and all that, but the essence of who we are will always be that canvas. And we need to remember that. We are not our belief systems. We are not our patterns. We're not even our experiences, even though our experiences shape us. Really, to be in a state of presence and awareness is to know that the essence of who we are is moving through all of these, all of these experiences, having this human experience. And what do we learn about ourselves in the process of it, but not attaching our identity to all of these varying moving aspects, you could say. So yeah, just what would it be like to let it go? What would that mean? What would you have to let go of? What part of your identity would you have to let go of? In what way would that be actually quite humbling, because you have to let go of being righteous or having revenge or being right, and being justified or sticking the finger, or whatever it is, or just, replaying and reaffirming a limiting belief that just no longer serves you. Like, what would it be like to just let go of that? And in all honesty and fairness, that ain't always easy. Like sometimes it's like, nope, can't fucking let go of it. Like, not going to happen, And all that indicates is you have more healing work to do around that. You got to love that part of you even more. You've got to be with honor, like, fuck, that really hurt me. That was really painful. Feel the feels, learn from it, process it, allow it to come out. But the whole thing, the point should be not to hold on to it and be in a state of tension. The point should be witness it, acknowledge its existence, feel it, process it, learn from it, and then let it go. because there's really no point to holding on to a past experience. Once you've processed it and you feel it and you can learn from it, then you don't need it anymore. And so that's the question. Are you holding on to something that you don't need anymore, but you haven't processed? And so there's the invitation. Process it so that you can let it go. And then, when I thought about that, I thought about my past experiences and any little threads that I was still holding on to. And I'm just like, wow, yeah, what if I just completely let that go so I don't have to be in that pain anymore? And I couldn't, in that moment as I was thinking it, I couldn't think like 100% like, yes, I'm free. I'm free of all of the past pains that I've experienced from, whatever in my life. But I'm specifically talking about relationships, so from men in my life. But there was like a sense of, like relief, love, like love floods in the moment we go into that space of compassion and open-heartedness, at least for me, okay? I can only speak from my own experience, but I know that whenever I've gone into a space of really just dropping into love and compassion and appreciation that we're all human and trying our best, and again, recognizing if someone is well-intentioned, maybe it's just that they don't have the capacity to show up in the ways that we'd like or to make the changes that we wish that they could make. It's like having the compassion for this human experience, which is just bloody hard sometimes. And it's scary and it can be painful. And, we can get attached to our routines and our sense of safety and our coping mechanisms, all of that stuff, right? But I know for me, it feels so beautiful when I can drop into that space of just love. And sometimes I'll expand into that or soften into that. And sometimes I'll there'll be the contraction of nope, I'm angry again. Or I feel resentful again or whatever. And again, that is just an invitation. Don't get stuck to the narrative that is attached to that. Don't get stuck in the person that you're projecting that onto, or the idea that you're projecting that onto, and let it be an invitation instead to come back to myself, turn towards myself. What is it that needs my loving attention so that I can let go of that past pain? I can let go of the resentment and the anger or the blame or the shame or whatever it is. I can let go of it because I've tended to the wound within myself. That person might never change in the way that we wish they could have. They might never say sorry. They might never, admit something. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter. It's what we know to be true within ourselves and what we need to give to ourselves in order to really be healed and whole. Well, not that we're not whole, but you know what I'm saying. To not fragment parts of ourselves and wall ourselves up and block our hearts so that we can't receive love, because we all really want love in some shape or form. So this invitation to learn to let go of whatever narrative or emotion that we're holding on to that keeps us from love, can we consciously bring that into the forefront so that we can really give ourselves the opportunity to receive love, because we all deserve it. We all deserve it. There is no human on this planet that isn't deserving of it. Even though there may be some maniacs on this planet, they actually still deserve love. You know what I mean? So that's the invitation. And I invite you to be really gentle with yourself and not push yourself to a point that if you're not ready for it. Letting go is, if you imagine that you're holding on to a tree branch and you're hanging over a precipice, where you could fall to your death, because sometimes that's how it feels, right? It's that big of a risk. You can't just let go. There's maybe one finger at a time, or there's a softening, and there's a needing to know, okay, if I let go, there'll be a net to catch me, or I'll be able to fly, or actually there isn't a precipice. I can actually put my feet, I'm an inch off the ground, but it's just in my mind, I feel like I'm hanging over a huge chasm, So be really gentle and kind and patient and go at your own pace. And as always, it's just an invitation. It's an invitation to come closer to who you are and be more loving to who you are, to yourself. And the more loving you can be with yourself, the more loving and compassionate you can be with others. And, maybe eventually we learn to not have the armor up, because otherwise we're just keeping ourselves from what we're yearning for, and which we so deeply and greatly deserve. So food for thought, take it or leave it as always, as feels right for you, and loving you from afar. You've been listening to Raw Conversations with Corinne Bloom. Thanks so much for showing up, listening in, and being a part of the conversation with me.